The sun was setting on November 10th, 1943 at Rechlin, Germany's top-secret aircraft testing hub. Out on the tarmac sat a massive, ugly American plane, a Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, that the Germans had snagged 2 weeks earlier. If German engineering had a soul, this plane was spitting right in its face. Seriously, look at it. It was so fat, so ridiculously bulky, Luftwaffe pilots had already nicknamed it the Flying Milk Bottle. Chief Test Pilot Hans Werner Lurk walked across the concrete, and you could practically feel the engineering community's collective cringe. The official intelligence reports Lurk read were crystal clear. American aircraft were crude, assembly-line junk, built by a country better at making refrigerators and fighters. The P-47? Exhibit A. A brute relying on pure muscle, totally lacking the elegant, deadly precision of their own Messerschmitt 109s or Focke-Wulf 190s. This P-47 was just a sledgehammer, or so the official line claimed. But Lurk was about to walk out there and realize something terrifying. The Americans hadn't built a crude plane. They had built something far more dangerous, a practical plane. This aircraft wasn't designed for individual glory or breaking speed records. It was built for industrial war, designed to be churned out in sheer, overwhelming numbers and stay relentlessly operational. In less than 90 minutes, Lurk would be back at his desk, scribbling a report that would be filed and completely forgotten. History, though, would prove him dead right. Germany was obsessed with engineering perfection for the individual ace. America was building a factory that printed victory. In total war, that difference alone would decide everything. Lurk knew planes. Born in 1916, he flew gliders as a kid, clawing his way up through sheer determination despite having zero money. By 1939, he was the guy at Rechlin, the German equivalent of America's legendary Wright Field. Lurk wasn't just a combat pilot. He was a trained aeronautical engineer who flew everything, 120 different types in his log book, German prototypes, captured enemy machines, you name it. His reports were famous for one thing: brutal, technical honesty. If a Nazi design sucked, he said so. If the enemy had a better idea, he documented it. That honest feedback made him powerful enemies among officials who preferred propaganda to facts, but his skill was too valuable to dismiss. YouTube_title: The American Mistake That Handed Hitler a Secret Weapon. Hans Vera Lurch was a guy everyone listened to, even when his honesty stung. But the question remained, how did the specific P-47 Thunderbolt, nicknamed Beetle, end up sitting on their secret Rechlin tarmac? This wasn't a daring capture. This was a catastrophic screw-up. It happened on November 7th, 1943. Lieutenant William Roach of the 358 Fighter Squadron was flying an escort mission when the weather turned into soup, leaving his entire flight critically low on fuel. His leader slammed down onto a beach. Another pilot bailed out over the cold North Sea. Roach was desperate, spotting what he thought was a friendly airfield in southern England. He landed perfectly, followed a ground vehicle to a parking area, and killed the engine. It was only then that the horror hit him. The soldiers approaching with their rifles weren't British. He wasn't in England. He was at a Luftwaffe base in France. Roach was a prisoner of war, and his P-47 was now German property. The Luftwaffe wasted zero time. Allied fighters were constantly prowling, so they rushed Beetle inland to Rechlin before the Americans or British could destroy their prize. It was quickly repainted in their colors, marked T9 plus FK, the badge of the famous Zirkus Rosarius demonstration unit, and left waiting for Lurch. He'd heard all the dismissive chatter from the other pilots. Asterisk, it's a joke. Too heavy. Too American. Asterisk, they saw a crude design relying on a massive engine to compensate for bad aerodynamics. But Lurch wasn't a gossip. He knew Allied engineers were sharp. If they built a plane this way, that meant they had a damn good reason. His job wasn't to mock, but to understand. As he approached Beetle, the sheer size was staggering. The radial engine was an absolute monster. The fuselage built around it like a sturdy barrel. The landing gear was robust, thick. Everything screamed heavy. German planes were sleek and elegant. This thing looked like it was designed by a shipbuilder. Yet, as Lurch began his walk-around inspection, The supposed crudeness vanished. The construction quality was shocking. Clean welds, precise panel gaps, high-grade materials everywhere. This wasn't crude mass production. This was sophisticated mass production. The aircraft was built to exacting tolerances that Germany's war-strained factories were struggling to maintain. Lurch climbed inside and instantly understood the source of the German pilot's complaints. The cockpit was enormous. The first thing that hits you when you climb into the captured Thunderbolt is the sheer size. Compared to the Messerschmitt 109, which felt like wearing a steel corset that squeezed every inch of your body, this cockpit was a literal ballroom. A German pilot, used his fighter fitting him like a tailored glove, would feel totally lost in all this space. But as Lurch settled down into that well-padded seat, something clicked in his mind. This wasn't a flaw. This was brilliant, deliberate design. Just think about the Bf-109. Lurch constantly had to crouch to avoid smashing his helmet against the canopy. Instrument access was a pain, and long missions were physically exhausting. The German philosophy was always that if performance was high, pilot comfort could suffer. The P-47 flipped that script entirely. This thing was genuinely, shockingly comfortable. You had room to move, stretch, and adjust position during those brutally long escort runs. The canopy was high and clear, giving him incredible visibility. Everything was within easy reach, designed for a human to operate, not an automaton. But the real mind-blower came when he examined the instruments. He noticed the dials weren't just black and white numbers. They were color-coded. There were explicit red and green sections marking the acceptable operating ranges for the massive engine. Why would they do this? A pilot could monitor critical engine status at a glance without ever having to read a single number. Then Lurch understood the genius behind it. He recalled intelligence reports. American fighter units were a complete melting pot. They had free French, Polish, and even other pilots who barely spoke a word of English. If you can't read the technical manuals, how do you fly the plane safely? Simple. Green meant good. Red meant danger. It was universal, intuitive, and idiot-proof. This wasn't crude engineering. This was sophisticated, inclusive design that fully acknowledged the human factor. The P-47 was built so a pilot with minimal training could still operate it safely. Lurch continued his inspection, noting how logical the layout was. The throttle, mixture control, and propeller pitch, the core controls, were all neatly grouped together on the left side. Everything was designed for absolute ease of use. German fighters, like the notoriously tricky Bf-109, were designed only for the expert. It took serious skill just to handle a Messerschmitt on the ground, without ground looping due to that narrow landing gear. The Luftwaffe had accepted this difficulty because their training program usually produced world-class experts. But Lurch knew the ugly truth. By late 1943, fuel shortages meant the Luftwaffe training program was collapsing, and new pilots were getting barely any time in the air. YouTube_title: Why Germany's Best Pilot Hated the Bf-109 After Flying the P-47. By 43, the entire Luftwaffe training system was collapsing. They were chucking kids into cockpits with almost zero flight time. Germany desperately needed aircraft that novice pilots could fly safely, planes that wouldn't kill the student before the enemy got a chance. But what were they still building? Highly tuned, unforgiving death machines designed only for the aces of 1939. So Lurch pulls out the P-47 pre-flight checklist. This manual was a huge clue. German manuals assumed you were already a genius. American manuals assumed you knew nothing. They explained everything in granular detail. He goes through procedures, hits the starter, and that enormous Pratt & Whitney double wasp engine. The R-2800 roars to life. And that sound, it was incredibly, almost unnervingly smooth. Lurch had flown enough captured American hardware to recognize the pattern. These engines were rock solid and reliable. And why was that so shocking? Because by this point in the war, German manufacturing quality was becoming a total joke. Their engines were temperamental divas. You had parts from different factories that didn't quite fit. They ran great on day one, then started shaking themselves apart on day two. But this R-2800, it idled like it could run forever. No vibration, no rough spots, No weird noises. Just pure, clean power, the sound of American industrial might. Building one perfect engine in a lab is easy. Building thousands of consistently reliable engines is how you win a world war. Lurch gets clearance and begins to taxi. And bam! Another realization hits him hard. Look at that landing gear. It's wide. It's beefy. The tail wheel locks down, keeping the plane laser straight. Taxiing was a breeze, visibility was good, and the aircraft felt utterly stable. Now, compare that to the BF-109. Taxiing the 109 was like trying to walk a tightrope while pushing a shopping cart. The narrow gear made the aircraft unstable, visibility was trash, and inexperienced German pilots constantly ground looped, crashing their expensive fighters on the runway before they ever saw a single enemy. The Luftwaffe just accepted the suicidal difficulty as the price of high performance. But the P-47 was built differently. It was designed to be operated from rough, forward airfields by stressed-out pilots of varying skill levels. It was forgiving. Lurch later wrote that he once got to lock the tail wheel, and the plane started to spin out, a classic ground loop. But he caught it. The plane was forgiving enough to let him save it. In a BF-109, that mistake is a guaranteed write-off. The P-47 wasn't just built to fight in the air. It was built to survive the messy, chaotic reality of war on the ground. He lines up on the runway, pushes the throttle forward, and the acceleration was impressive. That massive engine just shoved a heavy fighter forward with raw authority. The takeoff run was definitely longer than any German plane Lurch had flown, but it wasn't sloppy. It was smooth, lifting off without drama. He sucked the gear up and started testing the plane's muscles. Now, if you expected the agility of a BF-109 or the snap response of an FW-190, you'd be disappointed. The P-47 was not that aircraft. It was stable. It was predictable. It felt like a solid, forgiving tank in the air. Lurch fiddled with the controls, experimenting with the flaps at altitude. Just like he'd note later in his memoir, the hydraulics were flawless. Everything simply worked as advertised. There were no quirks, no systems demanding careful management, and no unexpected behaviors. This was a pattern screaming at him. The P-47 wasn't the most agile dogfighter. It wasn't built for low-altitude sprints, but was competent in every single aspect, and crucially, reliable in every system. German fighters were these high-strung, temperamental thoroughbreds, demanding perfection. The P-47? It was a bulletproof workhorse. And Lurch was beginning to understand that in the sheer brutality of industrial war, the workhorse always wins. Then he climbed. Above 15,000 feet, the turbo supercharger kicked in, and the Thunderbolt stopped being merely competent and became terrifying. Where German engines were gasping for thin air, the P-47 accelerated smoothly and maintained power effortlessly. The dive performance was savage, and the roll rate was shockingly excellent for a plane of this size. Lurch flew for a solid 90 minutes, throwing the fighter through every maneuver he could think of. The aircraft never surprised him negatively. The engine never coughed. The controls stayed responsive. And that's when the deeper truth hit him. The P-47 wasn't designed to be the ultimate fighter. It was designed to be the ultimate operational fighter. German engineers designed for a perfect world. Peak performance, expert pilots, white glove maintenance. American engineers designed for the messy reality of war. They designed this plane assuming the mechanics were tired, the parts were mismatched, and the pilots were stressed, possibly wounded, or maybe even undertrained. The P-47 was built assuming it would take battle damage and still need to get its pilot home. That, Lurch realized, was a profound difference, and need to keep flying. Every single design decision suddenly made perfect sense to Lurch once he understood this philosophy. The construction was tough as nails, the handling was forgiving, the controls made sense, the engine was utterly reliable. It all served one master: operational availability. Lurch finally brought the beast back down to Rechlin. The landing was totally straightforward, the massive, robust landing gear shrugging off the touchdown, without drama. He taxied back to the hangar, cut the massive engine, and immediately the German ground crew swarmed him. They were eager, waiting for the inevitable critique of the grotesque American fighter. Lurch climbed out, took a long moment, just standing there looking up at the Thunderbolt. Then he dropped the bomb. He told them, "It's the best designed operational fighter I've ever flown." The mechanics just stared, utterly confused. Best designed, this massive, heavy and elegant tub? How could that possibly be the assessment? Lurch had to spell out for them. "It's not designed for peak performance," he explained simply. "It's designed for sustained operations." And that, he emphasized, is a profound difference. That evening, Lurch sat at his desk, beginning the report that would seal his findings and ultimately be filed and forgotten. The flight was just gathering the evidence. Writing the strategic conclusion was the real job. He structured his findings clearly: performance, handling, systems, and the crucial strategic assessment. In performance, he noted the facts. Incredibly fast at high altitude thanks to that turbo, but a bit slow down low. The dive was a champion. The turning was adequate, but nothing to write home about. Handling was where it shone. Stable, predictable, easy to fly, great visibility, and a cockpit built for marathon missions. The systems section detailed the intuitive, color-coded instruments and the engine that never coughed or sputtered. But the strategic assessment? That's where Lurch wrote the prophecy Germany refused to hear. He explained that the P-47 Thunderbolt represented a fundamentally different and far more terrifying design philosophy. We, the Germans, optimized for peak performance, assuming expert pilots and perfect maintenance. The Americans? They optimized for brutal, reliable uptime, assuming average pilots and mechanics working in the field. This aircraft was designed to be run in huge numbers by pilots who weren't aces. The forgiving handling meant fewer crashes. The robust design meant more damage planes limped home. The reliable engine guaranteed consistency. This meant less downtime, less maintenance, and faster training. The Americans hadn't built the best fighter. They had built the most operational fighter, and they could build them faster than we could count. YouTube_title: The German Pilot Who Saw the Future, Why the P-47 Won the War. This wasn't just about more uptime and less maintenance. It meant faster training for pilots because the controls were so intuitive, slashing the time it took to get a green recruit ready for combat. The Thunderbolt wasn't trying to be the best fighter. It was trying to be the most operational fighter, and they could build them in numbers Germany could only dream of. Lurch paused, knowing this next sentence was a career ender. How do you tell the high command they're fundamentally wrong? He decided accuracy was more important than comfort, delivering the gut punch. The P-47 is not crude engineering. It is sophisticated operational engineering. Germany was building fighters designed for individual excellence, built for aces. America was building machines designed for industrial war. Lurch warned them. If the Americans could field hundreds of these tough, reliable aircraft flown by just adequately trained pilots, Germany's qualitative edge would be totally wiped out by sheer availability. His recommendation was stark. German design philosophy had to change immediately to prioritize reliability. You cannot win an attrition war against an enemy that can keep more planes flying more consistently, period. He signed the report and submitted it up the command chain. And what happened? It was read, maybe scoffed at, and then dutifully filed away. The conclusion was dismissed as hopelessly pessimistic. The P-47 was still a clumsy American blunder. End of discussion. But Lurch's terrifying predictions didn't take years to come true. They started almost immediately. By early 1944, the skies opened up and P-47 Thunderbolts appeared over Germany in massive, undeniable formations. They escorted the American bombers deep into the Reich. And here's the horrifying part for the Germans. They kept coming day after day, mission after mission. Luftwaffe pilots were tearing their hair out in frustration. They would pump rounds into a P-47, dealing damage that should have been fatal, only to watch the American pilot wrestle the damn thing all the way back to England. They'd shoot down one pilot today, and tomorrow a fresh-faced American was waiting in a brand-new P-47. The supply felt utterly endless. Meanwhile, the German war machine was choking itself to death. Allied bombing decimated factories. Critical material shortages forced ugly compromises. Quality control evaporated as skilled mechanics were replaced by forced labor. Aircraft that should have been reliable started breaking down constantly. Engines failed prematurely. The operational availability gap wasn't just widening, it became a chasm. Germany might have had more aircraft on paper, but how many were actually ready to fly on any given morning? A crippling fraction. The Americans, however, were flying high because their planes were designed for one thing: to show up every single time. YouTube _ The secret weapon the Nazis ignored. Why the P-47 won the war. But Lurch didn't stop there. He kept hopping into captured birds day after day, and the evidence just piled up. He flew the P-51 Mustang, that beautiful combination of blistering speed and massive range. He flew Spitfires, Hurricanes, Soviet fighters, you name it. Every single flight hammered home the same terrifying truth. The Allied aircraft were designed to be tough, reliable, and available. Meanwhile, that very P-47 Thunderbolt he had flown went on the road. It joined Zircus Rosarius, a bizarre demonstration unit that hauled captured Allied planes right up the front lines just to show German pilots what they were up against and how to survive a dogfight with them. Think about the irony. German pilots were getting detailed, sophisticated briefings on the enemy's strengths, yet the high command still refused to redesign their own superior German aircraft to match that operational advantage. It was a failure of imagination rooted in arrogance. And Lurch's worst predictions came true. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was completely broken, not because the pilots lacked skill or courage, but because the industrial base choked. Planes sat grounded, starving for parts or fuel. New pilots got minimal training because there was no gas. Everything Lurch identified as the American superpower, operational sustainability, was completely absent from the German war machine. Miraculously, Hans Werner Lurch survived the whole catastrophe. His flying record was legendary: 120 different types of aircraft, many without manuals, and he never once crashed or seriously damaged a plane. After the surrender, the Allies immediately grabbed him, fascinated by the reports they found in the rubble. An American officer sat him down and said, "You concluded our aircraft were superior not in speed, but in operational design. That is an unusual assessment." Lurch simply nodded. "It was the only assessment that mattered," he replied. "Your pilots weren't necessarily better than ours, and your aircraft weren't necessarily faster, but you could keep more aircraft flying more consistently. You weren't building for a quick dogfight victory. You were building for the long, brutal war." So, the P-47 was a beast, but it was a comfortable beast. Think about it. That cozy cockpit meant pilots weren't exhausted after just 2 hours. They could fly 8-hour marathon missions. The handling was so forgiving. It practically flew itself, meaning fewer stupid accidents. The engine? Rock solid, which meant less time stuck in the hangar waiting for repairs. And that robust frame? It was a tank. Guys were coming home with half a wing missing, but they were coming home. Did the German high command get this? When the Allied officers asked Lurch later, he just let out this bitter laugh. My report? They filed it right away. The official verdict? That he'd been demoralized by flying enemy planes and lost his objectivity. The party line was rigid. German engineering was sophisticated. American engineering was crude. Case closed. Any data that challenged the Nazi ego was thrown straight in the trash. Lurch was then asked the million-dollar question. If Germany had adopted this operational philosophy early on, could it have changed the war? He thought hard. By 1943, probably too late. Our industrial base couldn't possibly match American or Soviet production. But he insisted, if we had cared about reliability from day one, we would have saved thousands of planes lost not to enemy fire, but to simple mechanical failures and accidents that better design could have stopped. And here's the most tragic part. Lurch wasn't the only one saying this. Tons of brilliant German engineers wrote the same reports, made the same desperate recommendations. All of them ignored, because the conclusions contradicted the core Nazi ideology about German technical superiority. The final numbers are brutal proof of this failure. The U.S. pumped out over 15,600 P-47 Thunderbolts during the war. At peak, one was rolling off the line every single hour. Germany? They managed about 36,000 single-engine fighters total across all types of the entire war, and their factories were constantly getting leveled by bombs. But the real difference was availability. A U.S. squadron of 100 P-47s would launch 85 or 90 planes daily. A German squadron of 100 might only manage 60 or 70, the rest grounded from maintenance, lack of parts, or fuel shortages. Do the math. More planes times higher readiness times better durability equals total, devastating numerical superiority, right where it mattered most. Lurch finally got to tell his story later in life, writing his memoir, Luftwaffe Test Pilot, detailing his experiences flying everything from B-17s to Mustangs, always coming back to that P-47 observation. The sprawling comfort of the Thunderbolt compared to claustrophobic, unforgiving Bf-109. Why does Lair's story matter so much? It's not just because he got to fly some captured American fighter. A lot of pilots on both sides did that little dance. What makes him legendary is that he wasn't just seeing the P-47, he was understanding it. As a trained engineer and an experienced test pilot, he didn't just evaluate if the plane was good or bad. He evaluated the entire industrial mindset that built it. He saw the soul of the enemy's war machine. The P-47 Thunderbolt Beetle. Lair's flew in November 1943 was more than just a capture fighter. It was a physical manifestation of two completely opposite approaches to total war. Germany, frankly, was fighting World War I all over again. They believed in individual excellence, the genius pilot, and superior, cutting-edge technology winning the day. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 and the Focke-Wulf FW-190, they were magnificent machines, truly excellent aircraft when they worked perfectly. But here's the rub. World War II was industrial war, and America understood that. Their approach was about sustained operations, brutal simplicity, and overwhelming numbers. As the war dragged on, German perfection became increasingly rare. Manufacturing quality dropped like a stone. Maintenance became a horrific puzzle. Parts vanished. Fuel became a ghost. The German war machine was built for a sprint. The P-47, by contrast, was built for the marathon. This thing just kept flying. It absorbed insane amounts of damage and still hauled its pilot home. It could land and operate out of rough, bombed-out fields. Crucially, you didn't need a PhD in engineering to fix it. Your average mechanic could handle it. A pilot with minimal training could fly it safely, and you always had another one rolling off the line. Lair saw this devastating difference immediately. His report back in November 1943 was basically a crystal ball, accurately predicting the slow, grinding destruction of the Luftwaffe over the next 18 months. He laid out the truth plain as day. And what did the German High Command do? They filed it. They forgot it. Because the truth, that the enemy's philosophy was superior, was inconvenient and absolutely contradicted the arrogant Nazi ideology of German supremacy. History is absolutely littered with moments where the devastating, obvious truth was ignored because it clashed with comfortable, established beliefs. Hans Laers didn't just fly the P-47 Thunderbolt. He immediately understood that it represented a superior approach to fighter design, not superior performance in a dogfight, but superior operations. His reward was to be ignored, and then forced to watch as every single one of his predictions came true, watching the Luftwaffe get absolutely ground down by an enemy that could simply keep more aircraft flying more consistently. That, folks, is a timeless lesson. In any sustained conflict, reliability beats peak performance every single time. Operational availability crushes maximum capability. Design philosophy matters infinitely more than individual genius. The P-47 wasn't the fastest fighter of World War II, but it might have been the best designed fighter because it wasn't engineered for air shows, test flights, or breaking records. It was engineered for war. And in war, the side that can simply keep fighting the longest usually wins. If you found this deep dive into engineering philosophy, design decisions, and inconvenient truths compelling, make sure you smash that subscribe button.